Good evening. Hello. Thank you for joining Japan Foundation London's online event. My name is Junko Takekawa, Senior Arts Program Officer of Japan Foundation London. Some of you will remember that we hosted online event up close and personal, Curators Treasures last year, where 5 curators from 4 museums in England, which keep a Japanese collection, cherry-picked their favorite items. The work they chose was very diverse, from ukiyo-e to modern dress, and it proved that museums in the UK enjoy substantial treasures from Japan. However, one thing people may not notice is that it isn't just museums where Japanese collections are displayed. You can also see some of the finest treasures from Japan in situ in a castle, a manor house, or a palace. They are equally great safekeepers of our heritage. Following that warm reception from our audiences last year, and advice from Yoshi Miki, who has conducted extensive research on Japanese collection in the UK, even beyond the museums, we are inviting 2 curators from the UK, Suzanne Grunow, a property curator for the National Trust at Erding, a country house in Wales, and Rachel Peat, assistant curator of non-European works of art at the Royal Collection Trust, to introduce their collections as well as showcase their favorite items. We are also pleased to include Mary Redfern, curator of East Asian collection at Chester Beatty, Dublin, to illustrate what Culture Institute in our neighboring country does with a Japanese collection. Thank you for your enthusiasm and for joining us today. Of course, this event wouldn't be possible without Yoshi Miki's passionate research and advice, and now to particularly thank Mr. Miki to agree to give an overview of the situation of Japanese collections outside the museum in the UK, as well as moderating today's session. Now the world is gradually opening up, and then compared with the same time last year, you have more freedom to travel and visit culture institutes to appreciate Japanese collections in the flesh. I hope today's session will open your horizon and encourage you to find and hunt for Japanese objects in more unconventional places, such as castle, palaces, and manor houses all over the UK and Ireland. Next, housekeeping matters. We are using the webinar function. Your names will not be viewable and other attendees. However, I strongly recommend you to keep your audio and video muted throughout, just in case. If you have any questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to send you a question at any time. Remember that attendees' question may be seen by everyone else, so that you can upvote a particular question placed by another person which you would like to answer, or if it is the same as yours, simply click the thumb up icon next to the question you wish to upvote. Unfortunately, due to time restrictions, we may not be able to pick up all of the questions you asked, so my apologies in advance. Lastly, as always, we will send you an online questionnaire, so please spare a short moment to complete it for future events. So that's all from me. Now I would like to hand it over to Miki-san to proceed today's event. So over to you, Miki-san, お願いします。
Thank you, Junko. Good afternoon. I'm Yoshi Miki of the National Museum of Japanese History. I'm so glad you were able to join us today. I'm sitting on my desk at home in San Francisco suburb. I can't tell you what's going on in Tokyo, but I haven't been to Japan for over 2 years now. But we are going to talk about Japanese art in the UK. And I'm so thrilled to introduce some of my colleagues who love to talk about it. There are over 100 Japanese art collections. They are open to public. Many of them are in castle, country house, manor house, or palace. Almost none of them have a curator who is specialized in Japanese art, but you know, the curators love to study art. They are very good at it. I met these curators through the project. We, the National Museum Japanese History, work with them to support their research and exhibiting them locally. I met Suzanne and Rachel through this project. You will hear directly from them shortly. And we are also fortunate to have Mary from Chester Beatty of Dublin. It is a museum but has a unique history as Sir Alfred Chester Beatty's collection, private collection. And Mary is a specialized in Japanese art. Next, please. This is my handwritten map to show you where the Japanese art collections are. I hope this will give you some idea, which is you will find the Japanese collection wherever you go. Many of them are castle and house and or palace. They have been there over centuries, even before it was open to public. I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about the brief history and the project. I have worked for museums mainly in the US and Japan. Historical buildings was not my specialty when I came to the UK 10 years ago. Next, please. I myself almost immediately loved the environment of the place and the atmosphere where the Japanese arts were displayed. It looks so natural. Can you find them, some Japanese artifacts in this picture? There are three of them, the chest, ceramic, and then small ivory box in front of that on the table. My colleagues and of the National Museum and I share what we know about artifacts. In return, property curators tell us the history of the family and building. We learn from each other and find more good stories to tell to our visitors. We work together to develop interpretational programs. I learned a great deal of local history through the Japanese object. They were loved and preserved by generations of owners' family. Now they open its door to public. So we feel that it is our responsibility to preserve them locally so that people like us can visit and enjoy. We like the collection stay locally. I'm lucky to be able to travel around. I go to the place back and forth for a few years to study and share what I learned. Most of Japanese objects are on display. I usually surrounded by visitors when I study them. Visitors are curious to see what I do. They start asking me questions. I don't mind responding to it. This is why I'm here, using the opportunity to talk about art, culture, and history. We all look at the object in front of us and then exchange our thoughts. I learn something from visitors. Sharing is a great thing. Next, please. I can't be there all the time, but you will meet our floor staff. They are mainly docents who are trained to talk about objects displayed and the building. I truly encourage you to talk to them, talk to these docents if they are around. You can share what you saw. They will tell you what they know. That's the sharing, and you will have a wonderful time there. Getting to the castle or house will give you, I'd say, a good challenge. I drive a lot. I sometimes drive hours in the woods, over a mountain, and run through the plains to get there. They are not usually located in downtown. Most of them have a garden, farmland, grass field for sheep and cow. It is a large estate you won't find in a city. I always wonder how the Japanese objects were brought in here centuries ago. Next, please. In some places, it'll take another 5-10 minutes to get to the building after you arrive at the front gate. Then you may face another challenge to find a spot to park your car. You will see hundreds of cars in a parking lot. Castle, house, they are popular, very popular. People come and visit a year round. Next, please. I love walking through the garden. They are wonderfully designed. Suzanne once told me that she sometimes takes care of the plants and flowers. It is such a unique environment to see Japanese objects. You can enjoy art, history, and nature at the same time. Many of the places the owner family is living in, even it is open to public, it is usually divided into private and public. You may see them when you accidentally open a wrong door. I did it once. You would feel the presence of living. Although I'm not sure about the Buckingham Palace, I'm going to ask Rachel about it later on the program. The art collection was built up for centuries by generations of family. But how? In modern days, we have an internet. We can search for on Amazon, eBay, or auction house. Once you click, it will be delivered in a few days. But what about the year 1650? It is almost 400 years ago. In 17th century, a wealthy family had the place to live not only in their estate, but the major city like London. They went back and forth. As you know, the history, the Dutch or English East India Company were founded in the period. They brought ceramics, lacquerware, furniture, and others from Japan to the port of London or Amsterdam. These families had the first hand to look at them. Then they sent the purchases to their estate. Some of them are still there after 400 years. You may wonder how we know that some objects were there for centuries. One of the ideas is to go back to their family inventory records. The inventory was usually held when the current owner passed away by a house steward. I went to National Library in Wales to check the record. I reached the record of 1700 to identify the object with the assistance from the librarian. Lucky me, it is usually written in English, not Welsh, but I still need to learn how to read old style of handwriting. You may also wonder how the art objects came all the way from Japan. There are many research papers on it, and you can read too. It tells you that, for example, for the East India Company, their vessel took over a year to reach Japan. It stopped by many ports for food and water, like Cape Town, Mumbai, or Bombay, Jakarta, or other places before the arrival. The vessel stayed for a while to gather their purchases. Even they ordered ahead of time. There was a period that the crew of the vessel were allowed to buy their own so that they can sell personally. It takes time to fill the vessel. They also had to wait for the right season to catch a trade wind. A safe voyage was not guaranteed. It takes another year to reach London. In total, almost 3 years to come back. Some of the vessels did not make it, with the great risk. The artifacts you see today are the lucky ones which survived the long journey. Indeed, you are looking at something special. Some Japanese objects you will see in the historical buildings were surprisingly order-made. Japanese craftsmen made exclusively for the export. Japanese who lived in that period didn't see it because they were all exported. It means you are seeing something which you won't see in Japan. It was only after 1900 when Japanese museums started buying them back as a collection. I sometimes talk about this with my Japanese friends. They didn't know. They were designed to fit into the lifestyle in Europe. If not, it was adjusted after it arrived. Next, please. Take a look at this stand under the cabinet. The stand was made after it arrived. Even the color and design of the stand was matched to the cabinet. It looks natural, isn't it? Next, please. This is Satsuma lamp in Penryn Castle, Northern Wales. It arrived simply as a flower base. The rest, the shade and the golden bottom, which looks like a Japanese made, were added after it arrived. When Japanese craftsmen made it, they had no idea what would happen to what he or she made. You will be seeing Japanese as something very unique only at the castle and house. I'm looking forward to hearing from Rachel of the Royal Collection Trust about what she is going to show us. She has also many Japanese artifacts which I usually can't see. They are offerings to the royal family. I was overwhelmed when I went to see her. They were something I usually don't get to examine. So what I wanted to tell you is that this is the Japanese art which I won't see often in Japan. This makes the visit special. This time, I'd like to ask Suzanne to come in. Suzanne? Suzanne, you are...
Is that better?
Yeah.
Am I?
Yeah.
You can hear me now. Good evening.
Hi, Suzanne. I haven't seen you for 2 years.
Yeah, it's a long time, isn't it?
I wish I can walk around the Ardix garden. It must be pretty by now.
It's looking beautiful at the moment, yeah, it is.
Did you open to the public?
It is, yes. The outdoors area has been open for some time now, and we've been even able to open some parts of the house as well. So that's nice, people can come back in.
Okay. I have asked you to talk about 3 different properties you have worked with because they are all close to each other. I mean, a short drive distance. I usually spend a half day on each castle. So tell us what you learned, Sudan. Now it's all yours.
Lovely. Thank you very much. There we go. Well, good evening, everybody, or noswaith dda, as we say here in Wales. Thank you to Professor Yoshi, Junko and the Japan Foundation for inviting me to share some lovely treasures with you from National Trust collections. This evening, I'm going to share with you some of my favourite choices from 3 different sites, and they are all places I have either worked at previously or work at now. But first, I thought I'd start with a map to help orientate you. Here is a map from the National Trust website that shows England and Wales, and I've marked London with a big red star just down to the lower right corner. If you look diagonally to the left across the map, you will see 3 smaller red stars just across the border into Wales. Each star represents a property I'm going to mention today. And you can see how close together they all are. And it's about 200 miles from London to North Wales. So that's about 4 hours driving time, depending on traffic. And if you're able to visit at all in the future, you would be sure of a really warm Welsh welcome. There's lots of culture and heritage to explore in North Wales. And only last week, North Wales was awarded its 3rd UNESCO World Heritage Site status, this time for its imposing and dramatic slate landscape. So let me introduce you to the 3 properties in these photographs. Top left is Chirk Castle. Lower left, the red castle is Powys Castle, and Erthig is lower right, which is a manor house or country house, and each is quite different. Each is now owned by the National Trust, a charity that was founded in 1895 and is now the biggest conservation charity in Europe, which cares for buildings, coastline, historic sites and countryside, as well as art and heritage objects, with nearly 1 million works of art. I'm going to share with you some East Asian and Japanese collections from these 3 different National Trust properties in Wales. And the pieces of furniture I've selected give a really nice chronological picture of the types of objects coming from Japan to Europe, and in this case, Wales. And I've chosen objects from the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries. And I will conclude by introducing you to a woman who lived at Erthig in the 19th century, and we'll talk a little bit about her relationship with Japanese and East Asian objects. So let's start with Chirk Castle and the earliest piece of Japanese furniture. Now, this is the first known Japanese piece of furniture to come to Wales, and it's sometimes referred to as a Namban chest, and it's likely to have resided at Chirk Castle for over 400 years. Made in southern Japan, it was shipped out to Europe as custom-made furniture and was specifically made for Western market, combining traditional Japanese techniques with Western forms. And you can see here in a photograph of the long gallery at Chirk Castle on the left, if you look really carefully at the left-hand edge of the photograph, you can just about see the edge of the chest, making it into that photograph. The chest itself is dated to the early 17th century, and it is made of wood, decorated with lacquer, mother of pearl, shagreen, which is shark skin, and sprinkled with gold and silver powder. And the design depicts landscapes, animals, trees and houses, and also mon, which is the circular family emblems, all against a speckled ground and within mother of pearl lines and diaper work borders. Now, exactly how and when the chest was brought to Wales, we don't yet know, but it was probably acquired by Sir Thomas Middleton, who bought Chirk Castle in the late 16th century. Middleton was a member of the Elizabethan court and became Lord Mayor of London, and was a founder of the British East India Company. Therefore, he was really in the thick of London's trading networks with the world. This chest was a rare and luxurious object and would have been a powerful status symbol for Middleton. And you can almost picture Thomas Middleton inviting guests into the castle and impressing them with this exotic and beautiful piece of furniture from across the other side of the world. And I do wonder how it would have been received by any of the local Welsh population who might have been lucky enough to have seen it in the 17th century. In Wales, there is a tradition of carved wooden furniture, but nothing on the level of embellishment and decoration shown in this chest. This would have been completely different to anything the locals would have seen before. And if you just imagine on a dark Welsh evening, how the decoration on that chest would have sparkled and shimmered in the candlelight as Thomas Middleton walked through the castle with his chamber stick, and the chest would really have stood out from the dark wooden panelling in the room, and I think it would have been quite magical. Now, it's a bit of a treat with this photograph here. This is a photograph of the inside of the chest. And the underside of the lid is beautifully decorated, as you can see, with this pair of prowling tigers amongst the bamboo. Now, normally the chest is displayed with the lid closed because the pressure would be too great on the hinges to continually prop it open. But I do think this is one of my favourite details of any object in the National Trust, actually. I think it's just an absolutely gorgeous detail. So if you move from Chirk Castle, we're going to move on to Powys Castle, and moving on in time to the 18th century. And now there are several lovely black and gilded lacquerwork objects at Powys Castle, but I've chosen this one. It's a bureau on a stand, and I've chosen it because of the intriguing story behind it and the questions it raises about how people from different parts of the world, speaking different languages, would have organised themselves and interacted with each other. This object is an interesting mix of China, Japan and England, and this is one of a pair of black and gilt chinoiserie bureau dressing tables at Powys Castle, usually fitted with a mirror at the top. The bureaus are Chinese export and are thought to have been made in Guangzhou in the middle of the 18th century, and the pair at Powys Castle may well have been taken from Guangzhou to Japan to have the lacquer decoration added. Japanese lacquer was particularly appreciated in Europe for its high quality and refined imagery. And although Japan was closed to foreigners, the Chinese and Dutch were allowed to trade through the port of Nagasaki. And the intriguing thing with this pair of objects is, when the lacquering of these pieces was commissioned, it is surmised that something must have been lost in the translation, or perhaps the commission must have been misunderstood, because normally the frame at the top would have contained a mirrored glass. However, here you can see the Japanese artisans have filled the space intended for the mirrors with lacquered images of waterfall scenes. And you can see from the photograph water descending among rocks, trees and clouds, all very subtly depicted in gold on black. Now, the bureaus were never altered to contain mirrors, as might have been expected, and they have retained their decorative waterfalls. And we think they've probably been at Powys Castle since at least the 1770s. And here on the right, you can see a photograph of the blue drawing room at Powys Castle, where the two bureaus live. And it's very rich and sumptuous in interior, quite different to Chirk Castle. And it's full of lacquered and gilded collections from either China, Japan or Europe. And I think everyone who sees these two bureaus asks themselves those questions. Was it a mistake to apply the lacquer where the mirrors should be? Or was it intentional? But whichever way it was, the two bureaus are beautiful pieces of furniture. And I'm going to move now from Powys Castle to Country House, Manor House, Erddig, and start with some 19th century Japanese furniture. And here we have two small cabinets that are usually in store at Erddig, and I thought you might like to have the opportunity to see them in a little bit more detail. They are two table cabinets made of lacquer on a wooden carcass with decorative metal hinges and straps, and made in Japan for the Western market in the 19th century. Each cabinet has doors that open to reveal drawers, and one cabinet has 4 drawers and the other has 6 drawers, and decorated throughout with birds and flowers and landscapes, as you can see, in gold and silver on a red and black ground. And it's very likely they were made in the same workshop. These types of cabinets were targeted at a broad market, and they were much less expensive to produce than the earlier pieces we have looked at so far. Now, one of the really exciting things about the National Trust is that, unlike a regular museum, National Trust houses present us with art and objects in their historic contexts, a combination of location, with objects closely associated with that specific location, and people from the past with some really rich stories, and where each object really does have its own story to tell. Now, these cabinets belong to a woman called Victoria York in the 19th century, and excitingly, all the drawers are still packed with personal contents associated with her. And this is what I love about this object, or these two objects, and this is why I chose them, because they are both a very personal time capsule. So who was Victoria York? Victoria York was born Victoria Cust and was the daughter of Sir Edward Cust, who was a well-connected man and served as a courtier for the royal household. The links to the royal household were also on Victoria York's maternal side, and her mother, Marianne, had been a lady to the bedchamber to the Duchess of Kent, who was Queen Victoria's mother. And it was in 1846 that Victoria York, married Simon York and moved to Erddig to live and call it home. Now, the contents of each table cabinet that you can see here on the photographs include personal correspondence, such as letters and papers and envelopes, precious mementos of special occasions, including wedding flowers. There's a handful of 18th and 19th century coins, some shells, and archaeology specimens and other small eclectic ephemera. Each of the tiny items has a special and personal meaning rooted in the memories of a treasured event or a special relationship. Now, given the royal connections that Victoria York had through her parents, it's perhaps unsurprising that some of the treasured letters and papers contain references to royal events or occasions attended by Victoria York. And one letter does make reference to the Prince of Wales' wedding day and mentions other letters that concern the same ceremony too. Now, we've yet to transcribe the contents fully, but when we do, it will be really interesting to see what is revealed about Victoria York's links with the royal court. Did she get invited to any significant royal occasions because of her parents? Were there any occasions? Or what were those occasions, and what were her perspectives on what she was seeing? And it'll be a really interesting piece of research to progress in the future. These contents are also in the cabinets, and these are fragments of broken pottery, and you can just about see some tiny stuck on labels identifying each piece. Now, the labels claim they each came from the former Roman site of Wroxeter, and Wroxeter was once the 4th largest town in Roman Britain, so that was 2,000 years ago. But there was little research of any kind into the Roman site until the 19th century, when a number of articles and books were published about Wroxeter. So why has Victoria York got these examples of broken pottery? Was she excited by the new discoveries and findings? Did she collect them firsthand? We've yet to discover. And there are a number of handmade flower posies commemorating significant events, and you can see one of them here, written on a paper label and sewn into one posy made up of what looks like orange blossom and myrtle is Victoria York, August the 6th, 1846, and this is the date of Victoria's wedding to Simon York. And I think what I find particularly fascinating is that Victoria York chose to store these most important mementos of her inside her 2 Japanese cabinets. They were clearly very special to her. And as much as the 2 little cabinets paint a picture of Victoria York, so does the room at Erddig she used as her own private chamber or boudoir. In the 19th century, one room was used by Victoria York as her own private space more than any other in the house, and many of the furnishings in it were introduced by her. This room was named the Chinese Room sometime in the 19th century and is still called the Chinese Room today. Not just because there were precious Chinese collections in it, but also other East Asian and East Asian inspired objects. Now, here are 2 photographs of the Chinese Room, and one is a fairly recent one, the one on the left. And the one on the right is of the room in the late 19th century when Victoria York used the room as her own private boudoir. In the recent colour image of the Chinese Room, you can more easily see the colourful Chinese wallpaper on the left and how the arrangement around the fireplace is broadly similar to how it was in the 19th century in the image on the right. And I do think the image on the right is a wonderfully evocative photograph, and you can really imagine Victoria York inhabiting this space, surrounded by her treasured possessions. And by family repute, this is the room Victoria York did her letter writing in. And while we do have more research to do, what we can say at this early stage, by looking at the 2 Japanese table cabinets and this historic photograph of the Chinese Room at Erddig, that we do get a glimpse of the woman behind the objects. We can see a portrait of Victoria York emerging, and we can start to learn what was important to her in 19th century Wales. And this is a perspective that country house museums can offer, a really rounded perspective of place, of objects, of people and of stories. And it's really special, and that's why I enjoy my job so much. Next, I'm going to look forward to deciphering Victoria York's challenging handwriting, because her handwriting is rather challenging, so that we can transcribe the letters and understand her correspondence. And through that, we will surely start to uncover a sense of her personality and character, which will inform how we perceive the collection of personal objects that was so precious to her. And next, it's my final slide. If you're interested in finding out more about the National Trust, do have a look on the General National Trust website. It's quite easy to find. But the web address I've put up here is if you're particularly interested in searching National Trust collections. There are over 1 million records of National Trust collections on this website. So do have a look on that if you're interested, particularly in the collections. It's well worth an exploration. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce you formally. Suzanne Grono, the property curator for the National Trust. Well, obviously, I want to talk about the Victoria York and then her belongings. That's the special thing about visiting historical building like Arctic. You mentioned that you focus on the historical content to show to the audience, and this is the kind of thing people love to know more about it, because it's not only about Japanese objects, but have the history of Arctic and Wales in it. And that's the kind of things we'd like to pursue more. By the way, how did you find this cabinet?
Well, if anyone knows Arctic, it's got a really big collection. It's one of the biggest collections in the National Trust. So only some items are on show and some items are in store.
Wow.
And this is one of the items that's in store. And when I first came across this object is a few years ago when I worked at Arctic and was doing a collections management piece of work, and I had to take some digital images of the collections. And that was the first time I'd seen those two cabinets, and when I opened up the drawers and saw all the contents in it, it was a bit like Christmas. It was, I thought, I just can't wait to come back to these cabinets and start to research them, because even at first glance, it was clear that they were probably going to be the collection of one person from the history of the house. So that presented a really exciting prospect.
Is it open displayed in public, or are you going to?
It's not at the moment, but and it's not been fully researched, as I said. But I would really love to, in due course, is research it to find out more about Victoria York, about the objects themselves. I think there's a lot of potential to display this object and other objects from storage as well. Definitely.
Yeah, this clearly shows the Japanese objects are part of history of Wales. So that's the thing I'd love to like to know more. And can we read something about this?
In terms of published work into these cabinets, there hasn't been much so far. There is. All the National Trust collections are on the website, so National Trust Collections website. So there's a lot of detail of the collections there that haven't yet got in any like published or researched format. So if anyone's particularly interested in collections, keep looking at that National Trust collections, because collections are added continuously to it and they're being refreshed. And
I'm sorry, I always want. And in addition, your website has the collection database, and it's not on the general National Trust website, but you have exclusively for the website and the database. And I always use that, and it's such a fun website, database to look at. It's easy to find it. Anyone can find it easily. So I encourage everyone to look at it. So you can see the entire the collection of the national treasures throughout the UK. Anyway, thank you very much, Suzanne.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. This time I'm going to ask Rachel to come in.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, Rachel. Before I forget, I want to introduce you formally.
Thank you.
Rachel Pete. She is assistant curator for the Royal Collection Trust. It's one of the job every curator envy. Anyway, she is going to talk about the Royal Collection in Japanese collection and the Royal Collection, and also exciting news about exhibition, I hope. Suzanne, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Miki-san. Good evening, everybody. If you've not come across the Royal Collection before, I'll just tell you a little bit about it. The British Royal Collection is held in trust for the nation by Her Majesty the Queen. So I do have quite an impressive sounding boss. Together, the Royal Collection looks after works of art acquired by British monarchs over the last 500 years. And that spans everything from fine paintings by Rembrandt and Vermeer, drawings by Leonardo, photographs, works in the Royal Library, and works of art from all across the globe. And you may actually have seen some parts of the Royal Collection if you've ever visited Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace, Palace of Holyrood House, or the historic residences such as the Tower of London and Hampton Court Palace. So we're all over the place. And the Royal Collection Trust, our job is effectively to look after the collection. So we undertake research, we undertake conservation, we open the current residences to the public, and we run a whole range of learning events, digital events, a schools program, and we curate a range of exhibitions at the Queen's Galleries in London and in Scotland. And if you come to the Queen's Gallery in London at Buckingham Palace next spring, you will find it devoted to Japanese art. So I would like to whet your appetite this evening. But what I'm going to do is just tell you about 3 objects which run the full span from the very earliest Japanese items in the Royal Collection right up to something presented to the current Queen. They represent something of the Japanese collection within the Royal Collection, which includes everything from arms and armour to metalwork, woodblock prints, lacquer, porcelain, and embroidered folding screens. And they constitute one of the most important collections of Japanese art in the West by virtue of their provenance, because often they have a direct royal or imperial Japanese connection, and they reveal something about the relationship between the 2 courts. So let's dive in. This is my first object, rather formidable. You might not want to meet him on a dark night down an alleyway. But this samurai armor was the very first diplomatic gift between Japan and Britain. And it was sent to James I in 1613 by the shogun or military ruler of Japan, Tokugawa Hidetada. This came just 13 years after the first Englishman had set foot in Japan. So I've picked it because it's this kind of watershed moment of the first communication between these 2 rulers. And in fact, it was accompanied by permission for the British to settle and trade in Japan. So it unlocks all of the diplomatic and commercial interaction between the 2 nations. In fact, the shogun's father sent a letter with this gift, saying rather poetically, though separated by 10,000 leagues of clouds and waves, our territories are, as it were, close to each other. In other words, this gift makes 2 really distant worlds, 2 distant courts, feel sort of poetically, symbolically close. In fact, the armor to me feels almost like an ambassador. It looks like a person, a delegate who's been sent between the 2 courts. And in many ways, it functions that way. So this is a distinctly Japanese gift. When James I received it, it would have been unlike anything he'd ever seen before. 2 armors were sent, and they were the first Japanese armors that we know of to have arrived on British soil. So they must have caused something of a stir. It would have been completely different, as I said, to anything James I knew. He would have been familiar with the armor of medieval jousts or the steel armor in the European style worn by Henry VIII. But instead, what we've got here is the distinctive Japanese manner of armor, which is comprised of a wraparound covering on the torso called domaru, which fastens at the side to make this very flexible but protective covering. And it's comprised actually of hundreds of very, very little iron plates that are secured together by silk lacing. Now, what's exciting is that this armor still retains its original silk lacing. This is a very fragile material. It deteriorates very quickly over the centuries. And in Japan, it would be quite normal to replace and relace an armor as part of a conservation project. So the fact that we've got the original lacing of the armor that perhaps James I might even have tried on when he received it gives a sort of frisson of excitement, I think. It also evokes something of the world of the samurai, the military elites who sort of dominate Japan at this time under the shogun. That's partly because the helmet has got this distinctive shape that's known in Japanese as a pumpkin-shaped helmet with a raised section at the back to allow room for the samurai top knot or sort of ponytail at the back of the head. And inside the helmet is the signature of the personal armorer to the Tokugawa family, Iwaye Yozemon. And so this tells us this armor's got real pedigree. The finest workmanship has been chosen for this diplomatic gift. And all over the rest of the armor are auspicious symbols, including a dragon amongst clouds who's reaching for a pearl. And that pearl probably represents the Buddhist pearl of enlightenment. So altogether, we've got this incredible craftsmanship, this symbol of military strength, but coming directly from one court to another and starting things off. So that's this meeting of worlds that I've chosen for my first object. But fast forward with me 300 years later to the turn of the 20th century, and we've got another meeting of worlds. This woodblock print is by a Japanese artist living in London. And I don't know if you can see what the building is that he has depicted. It's none other than Buckingham Palace, so you can guess why it appeals to me. And it was made by this artist, Makino Yoshio, or Yoshio Makino, as he was known in Britain. And he came to Britain in 1897 as an impoverished artist. He used to walk the streets of London at night, often with a growling, empty stomach. But he was really captivated by the way the buildings appeared. And he wrote, "Age and the fogs have made the buildings so beautiful." In fact, he particularly loved how they looked under the light of gas lamps at the time. And so he tried to capture something of that in this print. And you can see it's very impressionistic. We've got these bleeding colors. It's very diffused lighting, almost a bit like European Impressionism. And he, in fact, was compared to Turner in the way that he used light and dampness in his work. He's also drawn on quite a lot of other European tradition in terms of his approach. So he's got this lovely winding sense of perspective of the path through Green Park to the palace. And again, that's quite European, and in comparison to some of the woodblock prints of the 17th century ukiyo-e, which often play off a deliberate flatness or two-dimensionality. Instead, he's drawing us in up to the palace. But what I noticed recently is actually the figures are quite ambiguous themselves. They're wearing this quite loose clothing, they're quite blurred. And so I think at a quick glance, they could be mistaken for either British tourists or perhaps Japanese wearing kimono. And I wonder if that ambiguity is sort of deliberate, this blurring of worlds. But of course, Yoshio Makino is using a traditional and time-honored technique of woodblock printing. The inscriptions on the side of the print tell us that although he designed the image and he would have worked initially from a watercolor sketch, somebody else carved the woodblock prints, and then another craftsman would have done the printing, applying subsequent blocks with different colors, one over the top of the other, to create this composite image. And this is a process of production that's been honed over the centuries in Japan. So really what we find is we've got this marriage of a kind of uniquely British subject with these elements of European artistry, but through a Japanese medium. And I love that kind of syncretism. The artist, in fact, gave this print to one of the inhabitants of Buckingham Palace. Here's Queen Mary. She's the consort of King George V, and she loved East Asian art of all kinds. And in fact, she created spaces in the palace devoted to Japanese and Chinese art, a bit like Victoria York, who Suzanne was telling us about just now. She had these rooms filled with lacquer and porcelain, and you can see some of the things she acquired. And so I love this idea that we've got a print of the exterior of Buckingham Palace looking quasi-Japanese, and then inside, hidden in the palace, are all these Japanese spaces. But now I did promise you something from the Queen, and so from one Queen to another, here is Her Majesty the Queen on her coronation day in 1953. And she was sent a gift by the Emperor Showa to mark her coronation. Now, this is the first moment, really, when Britain and Japan are on good diplomatic terms just after the Second World War. And so the imperial household are clearly thinking that they would like to give a gift that is impressive, that's generous, that signifies new conciliation and friendship. And they really pull out the stops. They present this magnificent cosmetic box by the leading lacquerer, Shirayama Shosai, and it ticks all the boxes. Shirayama Shosai was one of the pioneers of lacquer art in the early 20th century, and he did a lot to restore lacquer to the revered status, with individual urushi artists being on a par with calligraphers and painters. He was actually appointed an imperial household artist in 1906, which is kind of the equivalent of having the royal warrant. And so the imperial government, for this coronation gift, are clearly trying to look back to this sort of golden age of lacquer, but at the same time look forward to a new era of friendship. The details are absolutely stunning. What we've got is Shirayama Shosai's trademark sort of black glossy lacquer finish on the ground, and then this really soft heron in streaks of silver who looks very fluffy, looks very vulnerable. So it's delicate, but it's striking at the same time. And I've just shown you, again, an image of the interior of the lid itself, a bit like Suzanne showed us with that other cabinet, because hidden normally and only seen by the owner is this inside image with the 6 crows and an ancient plum tree. I think the fantastic heron is memorable and really striking as a gift. And as I mentioned, combines that kind of softness with a really impressive piece. There are only about 70 works by Shirayama Shosai known outside Japan today, and this is one of the largest, so it really packs a punch. And I think it must have had something of an impact on the Queen, because she became the first reigning monarch of the United Kingdom to visit Japan in 1975. Here she is enjoying some sake in Kyoto. She looks a little bit unsure, but I did think she enjoyed it probably. And so I hope that what you've seen is that we've come full circle from the very first diplomatic gift right up to the current reign. All these objects will be on display in our exhibition at the Queen's Gallery in spring 2022, along with many more that tell a similar story of that interaction between the two courts. So I hope I whet your appetite, and I would love to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Makino's print on Buckingham Palace, seen across Green Park. You describe his work as Turner. That makes sense. That's a quite unique way to express what I thought about. And then every time I come to see you, I walk through the Green Park, and that's the kind of view I mean, I can picture it. And then it's nice that we can connect to our life, and so that was a great choice. And samurai armor was scary.
Especially with the masks, I think, the face masks add to it.
That shows how well you preserved the artifacts. And all of them you just showed us are well preserved. The detail was so nicely preserved. And how do you, well, because I work for museum, so very unlike the museum, the Royal Collection Trust is something special. It's kind of mystic. So how do you preserve, and then how much Japanese objects are on display, and the kind of things? I'm sure people like to know about that.
That's a great question. Yeah, thank you. So there's this really lovely balance between the objects being a part of the kind of living fabric of the royal residences, as they have been for centuries. So we know that the samurai armor that I showed at the beginning was probably very quickly displayed at St. James's Palace, and for many years it was on display in Windsor Castle. So successive monarchs would walk through a room and literally see it. But at the same time, we want to uphold those sort of higher standards of conservation and storage. But they are part of the fabric of the buildings and often used for official royal events. So if you go to Windsor Castle today, you will see several Japanese armors on display. And likewise, almost any of the royal residences, you'll see porcelain and lacquer in the state apartments. So it's a living, breathing collection.
Yeah, and then every time I email you, you are all over. I'm in Buckingham today, and then the next email, you are in Scotland.
Absolutely.
So that's what you do. You take care of the all non-European art collection.
That's right.
That's your title. It's a very unique title. I've never seen before. So how many, the cultures or the different continent you take care of?
So my role, as you say, spans all of the non-European works of art in the collection. So everything from First Nations, North American, right down to Indigenous Australian and everything in between. And what's amazing is because the British monarchy's had such a varied role on the world stage through travel, through Commonwealth, empire, exploration, we've got some really incredible works that have been presented as gifts over the years. So pretty much anywhere you name it, there'll be something of interest. Yeah. But Japan is my obsession currently and will remain so.
I'm glad to hear that, and that's why we met. And then, so you didn't tell us about the upcoming exhibition. Are you want to talk about later?
Yeah, I can just say very quickly, the Queen's Gallery next spring, Japan Courts and Culture, will have over 150 of the finest works of art from Japan, telling the story of the interaction between the courts of Japan and Britain. So I'd love it if you come to see them. That nothing replaces seeing things in the flesh. And I can pop a link in the chat if people would like more information.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Rachel. Okay, so this time I'm gonna ask Mary to come in.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, Mary. Thank you for joining us. And this is Mary Redfern, curator for East Asian collection at Chester Beauty. She's going to talk about her collection, and I'm looking forward to hearing her. Thank you. Okay, it's all yours.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Miki-san, and thank you very much also Japan Foundation for inviting me to join this lovely panel. It is a very hard act to follow, but I will now look forward to sharing with you some of the things that I really treasure in the collection at the Chester Beatty, and hopefully entice some of you to make the trip over to Ireland. So I'm just going to take you all briefly out of the UK. If we take a short skip over the Irish Sea from those beautiful Welsh castles, and I'm actually already planning a road trip along that way myself, and we head to the Republic of Ireland and its capital, Dublin, where we will stop at the Chester Beatty. And the Chester Beatty is a public museum in the grounds of Dublin Castle. The garden you can see in front of our building is actually the Dove Linn, the black pool from which the name Dublin comes. And this site has been home to the museum since the year 2000. But as Miki-san mentioned, we have a very interesting history. So we're the Chester Beatty, and we were founded by a man named Chester Beatty from his private collection. It was a private library collection that he had developed over many years that is today the basis for one of Ireland's national cultural institutions. And this is Chester Beatty here. So Beatty was born in New York, in fact, in 1875. And he actually lived much of his life in the UK. So he was in the UK from the 1910s right up until 1950. And then, in what was a great surprise to many, having been collecting in the London scene for many years, knowing a lot of the curators and folk around, he decided that when he was retiring from the world of business, he would take himself and his collections over to Ireland. And he brought to Dublin this incredible collection of European, African, and Asian arts. And it was something that, as I said, surprised very many people. And this is a very big story, which I can't go into here for reasons of time, but there were various factors involved. And one of those was the post-war political situation in Britain, but it was also very much about the collection. So Beattie had been this businessman, a huge sort of multinational business before multinational visitors were even really a thing. But he'd also been building up this collection for many years. And he was really trying to figure out what the future that collection should have. And he decided that what he wanted to do was really to create a standalone institution that would share those collections with the public and with scholars also. So he first set up a library in Shrewsbury Road, which was open to scholars at first and then open also to the public. And this was the future he saw for his collection, but also he still had a lot of collecting left in him. So between 1950 and his death in 1968, he continued to add and build on that collection, developing it in ways he thought would really sort of support its growth. And today that's now reflected in what is now a very dynamic museum. So we have plenty online for those who can't get there in person, but I'd really recommend you make a visit if you can. By way of visually introducing the Japanese collection, which I have to say really is quite exceptional and very much guided by Beattie's personal preferences, I would like to start by saying that since starting with Chester Beattie all of nearly 6 years ago in 2015, I have made a lot of favourites along the way. And these favourites range from the gory delights of the tale of Oyama, where the drunken ogre Shutendoji meets his comeuppance, and yet, as we can see, even once he is beheaded, he's reluctant to go quietly and instead tries to bite the head off the warrior Raiko. Or we have the exquisite still life Suramono, which were a huge passion for Chester Beattie and something other collectors weren't really focusing on at the time in the 1950s. And these have amazing renditions of ceramic and glass and poems of auspicious greeting. Or indeed the endlessly compelling Chogonka scrolls, which tell this tale of the doomed love of the Emperor Minghuang and Yang Guifei. And in these scrolls, Kano Sansetsu loses or replaces the written word of the Chinese poem from which this tale originates and puts it all into painting with an artistic skill that really does sort of border on perfection. But perfection is hard to live up to. So one of my favorite sort of things to find, as Suzanne said, sometimes it's like Christmas being a curator. And for me, those Christmas moments are often when I see someone else's mistakes. And it really does give us a sense of the humanity of the artists. So even among artworks of the highest order, we can find the first lines of an eye and a nose that the artist Tori Kiyonaga has quietly abandoned within a preparatory sketch. But being a good sort, he has turned the paper round and started drawing again. Or indeed, a Suramono print beautifully printed for the year of the rooster, but unfortunately marked with the wrong year in the date in the top right corner. But luckily a golden cloud has been added to almost obscure that mistake. Bringing it all together, we can see that the Japanese collections of the Chester Beattie are really quite extensive. So this is almost all collected by one man, Chester Beattie. And they encompass narrative paintings, prints, Buddhist art and sutras, as well as a host of smaller three-dimensional works. And these were collected by Beattie between the early 20th century and the 1960s. And of these, we have almost 870 that can be viewed online in our collections viewer, and of course, our changing displays in the permanent galleries and our temporary exhibitions. And from this, I have the challenge now of choosing my favourites. So as it happens, the favourites I've chosen are both printed works, so quite different to the things you've seen so far today. But as I've suggested, I'm very fickle when it comes to choosing favourites. And if you were to ask me again in a month's time, possibly even a week's time, I might have a new shortlist to offer. But the prints that I want to share with you today are ones that really, for me, exemplify the playfulness and the engagement that I find so inspiring in Japanese art. And I think, as Rachel mentioned, Japan is sort of her new obsession. And for me, Japan has held me in an obsession for a very long time now. And that's because of this playfulness. It's that amazing spirit and also these discoveries that we can find within these objects also. So without further ado, here is the first object I'd like to share with you. And you might be wondering why I've picked this. After all the amazing things I've already shown you, these gorgeous sort of gory scrolls, these amazing paintings, these wonderful other things that we have. And this is a very intriguing print. And it's a very intriguing print, and I am not showing you the whole picture at the moment, so I'm being a little bit playful myself here. And for reasons that will become clear, I would also like to mention that no prints have been harmed or indeed folded in the making of this presentation. What we have instead is a digital reconstruction on screen, and in fact a printout in my hands, which I may try and show you as well if I can get it to work. But this is our starting point, and we start with the banner which has the crest of the Daimonjia brothel on it, so that's just here. And this is actually where I'm saying I'm not showing you the whole picture. What I'm showing you is a tsurumono. Now, tsurumono were really special prints, very unusual things, not things you'll often see in woodblock print collections, but something that Beattie was really passionate about. And the important thing about this large tsurumono is that it was folded for presentation. It was folded for the recipient. So we start with the banner of the crest of the Daimonjia brothel. If we flip the print around, we see the women gathering at the balcony. But what are they looking to see? To see that, we have to unfold it. So if we unfold from the cover, we then spy a little cuckoo. Oops, would help I had it. Yeah. And as the women are pressing forward, this cuckoo is darting just out of their reach. And the cuckoo, once we open it up again, we can see this cuckoo in his full glory. And beneath him, as he speeds through the shadow of the rains, we have the poets' verses. And this print was commissioned by a group of poets, and it captures all of their verses on the print. But by the cuckoo, we have something else. We have a red seal and the signature of artist Santo Kyoden, who, as Hokusai's collaborator, is marking his authorship of this little bird. With a final unfolding along the long edge, the image itself comes back into view, albeit upside down. So we then turn the whole thing on its head, and we can see the image, Hokusai's full design above. And it's a difficult thing to do online. It's a difficult thing to do in the gallery. But what this print really shows is some of the beauty that we find in a lot of Japanese prints and a lot of Japanese art is the story it tells, the story it's waiting to tell. Like the hand scrolls which unfurl, here the folding medium of a large tsurumono print is used to engage the recipient in a miniature story. We get a kind of narrative progression as we move through the object. And today we would display the print like this, and this is how it would be shown and how it is kept and stored and preserved. So it's kept flat and it would be displayed flat and framed. But we can still see these creases within the paper, that material memory of when this print was folded for presentation and shared among friends. And indeed, this is something you can try at home. So do take a look on our website and you'll find this print and you can print it out and try folding it yourself and see how it works. But this is something which is really unique, I think, because not only do you get this community of poets and this amazing playful relationship between Hokusai and Santo Kyoden, and we can imagine, you know, who came up with the idea of doing this combined thing where this little bird disappears and appears into view. For my second selection, we're sticking with the world of prints and going to the other end of things. So tsurumono were made as private commissions. They're sort of the luxury end of prints. And now we're going to a very beautiful printed book that would have been made for sale as part of sort of Edo's thriving popular culture. And in fact, the museum's collection includes about 100 titles of Japanese printed books. Some of these were bought by Beattie as early as 1917 when he actually traveled to Japan and also China. And others were bought on Beattie's behalf by Jack Hillier. So I won't go into the collection history too much, but for prints especially, we have these two areas. We have a few things that were bought in 1917, but really at that time, that was when Beattie was focusing much more on the painted scrolls. But really his interest in Japanese prints is taking off in the 1950s. And it's because he sees these as important things to include in the collection of the museum he's establishing in Dublin. But we're not sure exactly when this book itself was bought, but I have a suspicion it might have been 1917, because I don't see it among Hilliard's records of the things he's purchasing for Beatty. But what makes this book really unusual in our collection is that we actually have the wrapper it came in. And it's really unusual to find Japanese printed books with their wrappers preserved, because this is something that would have wrapped the book, would have been displayed for sale, and then as soon as it was sold and people started reading it, the wrapper quickly gets lost and discarded. And much like the creases on the surface of the Tsurumono, this wrapper gives a sense of the tangibility and engagement, how this book would have been bought, taken up. But that's not why it's my favourite. Inside, we find a classic floating world story. From a chance encounter at the shrine of Daikoku-ten while celebrating New Year, a commoner falls in love with a female of high birth, and the scene is set for a tale of love against the odds. What is different, and what makes it my favourite, is that here this tale, which is no less than a love triangle, is told with a cast of beautifully printed and delicately whiskered white mice, or indeed rats, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt in English. And these mice do not mope around in a lovelorn haze, no. They encounter ghostly apparitions and battles in which they demonstrate a curious degree of musculature. And there are also reworkings of iconic scenes from Japanese drama. So this book is really playing with everything at its disposal. So here, in a scene of an abduction where the female protagonist is abducted away by the jealous lover, the image is actually a play on the capture of Yukihime in the Kinkakuji act of the play Gion Sairai Shinkoki. And in that play, when tied to a tree, the human woman, Yukihime, gathers cherry blossoms into the shapes of a mouse at her feet, and that mouse comes to life and gnaws her way of ropes. So here what the artist is doing and what the book is doing is playing with that knowledge, playing with that joke, so that the recipient will see something they recognize and can enjoy. And here, similarly, we have what's actually a sort of very classic Michiyuki scene, where two lovers make their way across the moonlit Musashi Plain. And this is a scene that would have been found in popular storybooks of much older folktales, including The Mouse's Wedding, as well as in sort of kabuki plays and performances that would have been part of Edo's thriving popular culture. And such reworkings in themselves reveal the outlines of community. These are jokes, really, that only work because of shared knowledge. And while this community might not be as tightly defined as the poetry groups who shared Tsurumono, it's still just as tangible as this group of female readers from its preface shows. And what is more, Fat Tales of Lucky Mice can speak to some of the wider pressures that this community was under. And this is kind of your dream as a curator, an object that can tell so many stories and do so many jobs for you in the space of an exhibition, in the space of a display. Because a few months after Fat Tales of Lucky Mice was published, it was actually condemned by the authorities as being too luxurious. The colour blocks were ordered to be destroyed under the authorities' censure, and no more of these books were produced. So in some ways, these were not such lucky mice after all. And in fact, as it turned out, the year of the rat was not so lucky for us either. So our planned exhibition of Japanese prints, which was going to feature this lovely book, had to be postponed. But we're so delighted now that this exhibition is now open to the public, and we're open on site in Dublin Castle, but also online, and we can actually explore the whole exhibition in 3D online, and we're finally getting to share some of those stories. And here I'd briefly like to express my thanks to the Japan Foundation also, who've generously supported the exhibition catalogue for us. So after sneaking in that little bit of promotion, and it's also that I can use to sort of draw this to a close, because for me, what really brings me back to sort of choosing these favourites, being asked to choose favourites is a very hard thing, but both of these objects really speak to community. They speak to the communities that made them, their shared engagement, knowledge and insider jokes, but they've also been handed down through time, and it's work they're still doing. And fundamentally, it's why I do the job I do and how I see museum work. It's by creating and indeed recreating a body of shared knowledge, sharing the stories, sharing the jokes, explaining, but also just sort of offering people the chance to find their own stories. And those stories can be objects that sort of are within the whole object from the time it was made, or as Suzanne and Rachel have both so eloquently shown, stories that have built on them over time as they've been handed down. all of those stories give us an opportunity to bring people together around art and to build, in fact, our own communities. Something which has been challenged by the COVID pandemic, but as events like this demonstrate, still very much happening. So with that, I will finish and look forward to your questions there. Miki-san.
Thank you, Mary. You are such a storyteller. I've been looking into your Chesterfield's website. It's very dynamic, and just like you described, lots of contents and interactions. Are you working on special on the hard working on the contents these days because of the pandemic, or always like this way?
We were actually very lucky in a way. In 2018, we did a huge overhaul of our website and started to put together the online collections database. If anyone saw our website before that, it is a huge change from what we had before. We had very, very little online before that time. So that meant that when the pandemic did unfold, we hadn't really been doing much beyond that, but we did have this amazing resource sort of ready to take extra content. And then, yeah, it's just been a case of sort of seeing what we can move into the digital world, what activities we can do, so with artists or talks or other things, but also, yeah, little video tours. We're now doing Instagram, so the curators are leading the Instagram account for the Chester Beatty. So it is about lots of different forms of engagement, but it's also then trying to see what we can keep going, because now we're reaching different audiences who, you know, may never have found us only in Dublin, but can find us online. So it's a challenge, but it's also a very exciting time.
I agree. You've done a wonderful job introducing the collection to public past couple years, and then that's the result I can see on the website. It's just focusing on the specific of the artifacts and talk about, like you introduce a story, and that kind of we're into the story, and which is very nice. I love everyone, anyone you have interested, just get into that website and then look into it. And how's the new exhibition? That looks very colorful. The Edo and the fireworks, just great timing.
Yeah.
How the audience reacting? Well, are they able to come more?
Yeah, so we were able to open the exhibition at the end of May, which was almost a full year after it had planned to open. And yes, visitor numbers are definitely lower than we would normally have, because normally we have a lot of tourists coming into Dublin. But actually what has been really great is, as the visitor numbers have been growing, we've got really positive responses from local people also, and younger people coming into the museum who we wouldn't normally see, because it is something that captures so many people's imagination. And I think for us, the big advantage, and this is something that is really important to me, both from working in museums in the UK and now at the Chester Beatty, is our museum is free. And our exhibition is free as well, so people can come back, and we have a great cafe, so they can come there. And this is definitely an advantage with the National Trust, is the cake that you can get in National Trust castles, which I don't think you've mentioned yet. But yeah, art is a place for people to come and share it, really, for me. And I think that's what we're seeing with this exhibition, is that there is so much interest, and people really want something nice to do with their family, nice to do with their friends. And we actually have two parts to the exhibition. So we're now 2 months into the first part. We've got another month to go, and then we will change all the prints over and sort of try and keep up with the seasons, and then give people a bit of hope of spring to follow the grey Dublin winter. So lots still to come.
Yeah, well, that's one of the challenges we always have, the exhibiting the prints, and because the preservation we can't display for a long time. But at the same time, we rotate so that the visitors have more opportunity to look at more artifacts than usual exhibition. So that'd be great to have this the people come back to look at the second version of the exhibition. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Well, this time I'd like all of you to come back. Okay, listen. It's been an hour and 20 minutes. But I just couldn't believe it. It just went so fast because all the story you told us was just wonderful. I mean, I couldn't catch up the time. But anyway, but still, we're still here, and I like to talk about it, something a little bit. And particularly, like Mary mentioned, that under this pandemic, we more focus on local audience because many can't far. And so this is an opportunity to reconnect our local audience, even the Buckingham Royal Collection. I'm sure they think about it. And then how are you doing? I just wanted to shortly, Millie, you answered most of the questions. But Rachel and Suzanne, how are you doing? And then people are coming back, or what's your plan for next, say, 6 months or a year? What would you like to try to connect the audience? Suzanne?
You're right when you say that the local audience has really responded now that we've reopened again, and we were aware we were important to the local community, but over the last 12 and 18 months, we've been more aware as well. And I think because Erthig and lots of National Trust places have parkland and outdoor spaces as well, and gardens, at various points over the last 18 months, that's been really important. And gradually, as restrictions have eased, we've been able to open more of our historic interiors. And now people are responding and feel as though it's getting a bit more back to normal. And as restrictions reduce again across the UK and in Wales, they're going to reduce again in August. It gives us more opportunity to open our places. And I think we've got to be respectful of the audience's needs. We don't quite know what our audience has been through over the last 18 months. And some have had a very difficult time, and some are quite cautious about coming back. And we're very much having those discussions with them and encouraging them back in when they feel comfortable to do it. And we know our audiences do feel safe coming onto our sites because they keep telling us they feel safe. They know we're going to look after them and have their best interests at heart. So we're going to carry on working with our audience.
Yeah, good luck. Rachel, you have the gallery in London and also Holyrook, the Edinburgh, and then other castles. How are you dealing with that?
Yeah, so we have definitely noticed the absence of international tourists, in part because they often flock to see anything royal, anything to do with the Queen. But as Suzanne and Mary has said, actually, we really enjoyed the opportunity to go digital and do lots of digital events and connect people who would love to come and visit and often can't. So we have a big US sort of fan base, as it were, who are really interested in the collections, but can't get over here very frequently. And so running online events, also events for people with access restrictions, so people in care homes, we ran some online events for them. But we're also just thinking about how we can tailor the sites that we do have to the restrictions currently. So we've opened some outdoor spaces we didn't normally have open. So the East Terrace Garden at Windsor Castle is open for the first time, and the gardens at Buckingham Palace for picnics, which is a world first. And then in Scotland, we quite often will try and tailor things at the Queen's Gallery there to a Scottish audience. So drawing out particular Scottish connections wherever we can. So it's a bit of a sort of threefold approach, but like everyone else, we're adapting and evolving, we hope, as we go.
Oh, well, I wish I spent almost 2 years, 10 years back and forth, San Francisco and UK, but past 2 years, yeah, this is the only way we can communicate. But that's the reality. But hopefully, but we will be ready when we fully open. I can tell we are kind of pumped up during these 2 years. So good luck to you. And we have a couple of Q&A I'd like to answer. If anything you'd like to answer, the questions from the listener?
I think the one about conservation is a really interesting one. So as the question already suggests, the question is, if items need to be restored or repaired, are there people in the UK who have the skills, or must objects be sent to Japan or Japanese craftspeople brought here? And this is definitely a sort of a thing. When you're working with East Asian arts, they have very specific different demands conservation wise. So I can speak to the Chester Beatties and then hand on to Suzanne and Rachel for their experiences. So for us, most of our collection is works on paper or works on silk. So we have in-house a team of paper conservators, and because of the nature of our collections, they are quite focused on non-European works of art as well. So all of our books, all of our prints, in brilliant hands with those. But for our hand scrolls, this is a whole extra set of skills and different experience. So our hand scrolls, Oyama, each scroll is up to 15 meters long. That's something very hard to conserve. So it has been in the past that things have been sent to Japan, where obviously there are studios perfectly set up. Handa is one of the amazing ones. But there are also people in Europe who've specialized in this. So we now work with a conservation studio in Leiden, and the conservators there trained with the British Museum, worked at the British Museum on the hand scrolls there. So now we don't have to send things all the way to Japan. We can send them to Holland, which is slightly easier, but it is very much finding those specialist skills.
And I can add some, well, I worked for a museum in the US over 10 years. So Smithsonian and the Museum Fine Art Boston and Metropolitan does have a conservation. And also like the curators like us who travel a lot, we see these things on the object, and then we report back to Tokyo. The National Institute, they have Conservation Institute, and then we kind of talk to them, and they ask them to come and then look at it, and then sometimes they bring back to Japan to do the conservation work. So we constantly communicate each other within the National Museum and other curators in Japan and Europe, so that we have some information. And then, well, it costs quite money and time. So sometimes you have to wait the time, you have to wait, but we try to do one at a time. And that because these Japanese artifacts overseas are I would say, the ambassador of Japanese culture. And so we want them to stay there for a long time. So we try to preserve and help to conserve the objects. So that's a very good question. And you can also tell us, I saw this and then they need some help. We like to try. So, and there's a question from Melissa. About is there any significant Japanese textile collection? The one thing I know is that at the University of Manchester, and their University Museum have a quite unique textile collection. I was shocked to see that. So, but anyone about the textile collection, Rachel or Mary? Not our specialty, so but
we do actually have a small textile collection at the Chester Beatty. So this is we started sort of as a library collection, which is definitely a misnomer when it comes to East Asia, because we have all kinds of other things in the collection as well. And actually the textiles we have are really interesting and really need more work. They weren't collected by Chester Beatty, though. They were collected by a man named Neville John Irons, and sort of arrived at the museum after he passed away, and they're Meiji period, and they are huge. So it's sort of these big exhibition style textiles. So if anyone has any specific interest in those, do get in touch with me. We've had some nice conversations with Claire at the Ashmolean, who's been looking into these Meiji textiles. But it's definitely sort of, yeah, there's always, as Suzanne was saying, sometimes it's like Christmas. There is always something new that you find and you're thinking, okay, when will we get around to figuring out that or documenting that? And with these, the challenge is the size of them. We have nowhere we could display them at the moment. So that's another thing we can work on for future.
Miki-san, I think we're
Yes,
at 8.
please.
We're almost at 8 o'clock, but so I will maybe bring us full circle by just saying, have a look on our collections online websites, and you will find much more in terms of textiles and all kinds of other things to search for. So maybe that's a good plug for all 3 of our institutions to finish us off.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Well, probably we're gonna ask Junko to comment.
Thank you so much for your coordination and just following the introduction behind the scene. So we are going to finish at 8 o'clock today. Anyway, that was really interesting session, and each one of you presented very nicely. I was very excited to know what actually you chose as a favorite collection, and each one of you chose a very different one. And of course, we should actually see it in the flesh, definitely. And one of the good things about Manor House and Castle is that not just only that you go there and see the collection, but also that you can see the nice building, nice environment. It's nice outing as well. And then also, I've never been to Dublin, so I definitely want to go and then see that your wonderful exhibition. And it's nice to know that Just BT is running an exhibition, and then also that in Royal Collection is going to hold that fantastic exhibition. And then also there is a lot of places in Wales that you can still see it, visit, and see that the collection, Japanese collection. And then I hope that everybody watching today would actually come and see that collection. And I know that from my experience that you have a very limited space available, so that not every collection you hold on display, but one day you will see that many national treasures and Japanese treasures in your environment. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Miki-san. I think you're the most fortunate person because you visited all over the place and then saw that those questions. I'm most envious. So anyway, yeah, sorry, go for it.
Yeah, it's like Christmas all year round.
Exactly. And then somebody commented on chat, it's very interesting, Rachel. Somebody wanted to take your job. So watch out.
And then I'm at risk.
Anyway, thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful presentation, Rachel, Suzanne, and Mary, and the Mixon, of course. And then I hope that everybody enjoy it. And then I hope that you have wonderful evening or morning. I know some people actually join from San Francisco, and some people join from the India or whatever. Wherever you are, have a nice day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.